On Wednesday, we were all watching a horrible chapter in our nation's history unfold in real time on our screens.
To talk more about this threshold political moment, Yale political science professor Jacob Hacker joins us.
Good morning, Professor Hacker. Thank you so much for returning to face the state. The Democrats will control the presidency and now the Congress, though, by slim margins. Can you talk about that dynamic going forward?
Yeah, I mean, certainly in any other week, the biggest news would be that the Democrats won these two special elections in Georgia. But of course, that wasn't the big news. And I do think the events of this week are going to shape the dynamic beyond those two Senate elections. But we should start with the basics, right? The House is very closely divided, but it's a majority rule body. So the Senate is really where the action is. And it matters a lot because that's where President-elect, soon to be President Biden, that's where his appointments will and his judicial nominations will be considered. So the Democrats will have a majority by virtue of the fact that the vice president has a tie-breaking vote in the Senate. And that's a very, very slim majority in the Senate. We really haven't seen something that close since the George W. Bush presidency. You may recall that brief moment when Jim Jeffords handed the Democrats, by switching to an independent, handed the Democrats the majority. And the reality is that for a lot of the stuff that needs to get done in the Senate, you need to have more than 50 votes. You need to have 60. But I, and we'll talk about that. But with the filibuster, you need to have 60 votes. And so it's going to be hard. But I think that the events of this week, the fact that the pandemic is still raging, the economic problems are still really severe, but at least initially, Joe Biden is going to have some cooperation and some capacity to get things done, and certainly more than he would have had those two Senate elections not gone to the Democrats.
What do you think the events of Wednesday have done to Republican willingness to cooperate with Joe Biden?
I wish I could say that it's going to fundamentally change that willingness, but even after the what are we going to call it? The storming of the Capitol, the violent activities that we saw. There were still over 100 Republicans who sided with the election challenges in the House, and though it was much fewer in the Senate, it's not as if those efforts completely evaporated, even given that context. I think Mitch McConnell will want to cooperate with Biden on a few issues, but in general, I think there's going to be really, really significant incentives for the Republican Party to be unified in opposition. And I think the real question is, first, how aggressively will President-elect Biden use the one big route to getting things done without facing that 60-vote filibuster threat, namely the budget process? So how aggressively will he try to do things through this expedited budget process? And then will Democrats hold together? In particular, will some of the more moderate Democrats like Joe Manchin feel like this set of events has really meant that Joe Biden deserves to get a special measure of support from Democrats who certainly are unified in horror at what's happened over the last week?
Crystal Ball, what do you see happening to the Republican Party in the post-January 20th world?
Well, I think that we can safely say that the Republican Party is now facing that civil war that people talked about for so many years. So I often said that the line between the sort of more Trump-oriented part of the party and the more traditionally conservative part of the party wasn't that big of a deal, because after all, Mitch McConnell got a lot of what he wanted under Donald Trump. But I think we're now seeing a potential rupture within the party, because there is the Republicans have done pretty well under the American constitutional system, right? The Senate favors them because they're more likely to represent these less populous states. They've gotten a 6-3 majority on the Supreme Court. The Electoral College has been favorable to them. So, the current, group around Trump basically doesn't even believe, it seems, in respecting the Constitution. And that's a real rupture within the Republican Party. So I think that you have seen that with, someone who's very conservative like Tom Cotton going up against someone who's very conservative and seems very similar, like Josh Hawley. These two candidates were often seen as being just sort of like the next generation of Donald Trump. But in fact, there is a split between them. So I think the party is going to have to work out these differences, and it's not going to be pretty. And it's going to require, I think, that the Democratic Party be pretty unified and pretty, willing to call out what we just saw as being, a huge challenge to our democratic system.
Our political parties are vast and pretty evenly matched. How long does it take to make changes fundamental changes in a major political party?
Well, we've sometimes seen them occur very quickly. Historically, we've always had a very strong two-party system. There's a famous quote from the historian Richard Hofstadter that third parties in American politics are like bees. They sting and they die. But the changes can happen really quickly. What's going to happen is that the Republicans are going to have to lose really big in a few high-profile elections before you're going to see the party split apart. But if that happened, I think you could see the change happen really quickly, because a lot of the money and resources within the party, they're willing to stick with the party if it's winning. But if it's losing, you're going to see groups like the Chamber of Commerce and these other groups say, we need to change this party's orientation fundamentally.
Got it. Thank you so much, Professor Hacker of Yale University. Really appreciate your perspective. That was very helpful.
Thanks for having me on.
Okay. As we end our show today, we want you to know that this has been our final time co-hosting Face the State. When WFSB invited us to moderate the program, we discussed my primary job, which is running a communications firm. We agreed that I would not participate in interviews that involved clients or issues in which my business is involved. However, recently my firm was awarded a contract to help the state's public health department disseminate information about COVID-19 testing and vaccines. As you can imagine, those topics, COVID and the vaccine, are going to dominate the news for many months to come. So the mutual decision has been made that you, the viewers, would be better served if there was absolutely no question of any conflict.
Comedian Joan Rivers lived by a wise code: walk through any open door, say yes to opportunity. I was delighted to follow that advice when I accepted WFSB's invitation to co-host Face the State last fall. Doobie and I arrived as a team, and we leave as one. I'll do what I usually do, write a column for the Sunday edition of the Hartford Courant, and report news on my website, Daily Ructions. I'll continue to say yes to opportunities, and I hope you will too. We may not be going away from WFSB. When there are big political stories, and there seems to be no shortage of those, we've been asked to continue as WFSB's political analysts.
Thank you for watching today's program. CBS Sunday Morning is next. Have a great rest of your weekend.